Billionaire's secret baby. Victoria Sterling's heels echoed against the marble lobby of the Chrysler Building as she pressed the elevator button. Her emerald green dress caught the sunlight streaming through the tall Art Deco windows, but her grip on the manila envelope revealed her unease. Inside were documents holding a secret powerful enough to dismantle Alexander Kane's billion-dollar empire. On the 47th floor, Alexander adjusted the cuffs of his charcoal Italian suit before turning toward the skyline. At 34, he had transformed his father's company into a corporate powerhouse, his sharp jawline and steely focus reflecting the weight of success. What he did not know was that the woman who once challenged him in classrooms and boardrooms, before vanishing from his life 3 years earlier, was moments away from stepping back into his world. Some secrets are worth $1 billion, but this one could cost him everything he's built. Victoria's chest tightened as the elevator doors opened. With each step toward his office, the question pressed heavier in her mind. How would Alexander react when he discovered he had been a father for 2 years without knowing it? Subscribe for tomorrow's story. Tell us where you're watching from. Your support helps bring more powerful stories. Let's begin. Victoria stepped into Alexander Kane's office with her chin lifted high, her briefcase clasped tightly at her side. The view behind him stretched across Manhattan, glass towers reflecting the late morning sun. He stood by the window, his posture rigid, his dark hair combed neatly, his tailored suit fitted with sharp precision. "Victoria," he said, his tone measured. "Alexander," she replied, setting her briefcase on the polished desk as if planting a flag in enemy territory. It had been 3 years since she last looked into those steel-gray eyes, years spent rebuilding her career while keeping a secret that would change his world forever. But today, she was not here as the woman he had betrayed. She was here as the newly appointed head of sustainable development for Kane Industries. He gestured toward the leather chair across from him. "Sit. We have much to discuss." Her steps were steady, though her stomach tightened. Every detail of this office spoke of wealth and control. The mahogany desk, the sculpted lines of the furniture, the subtle scent of leather and cedar. She lowered herself into the chair, keeping her expression unreadable. Alexander leaned forward, fingers steepled. "The Oregon project is on the brink of collapse. Investors are restless, and the press is circling. Your job is to stabilize it before the board loses confidence." His words were clipped, efficient, yet beneath the surface she heard the echo of a man who once shared her passion for innovation. In another life, they had dreamed of changing the world together. Now he spoke as if she were just another employee. Victoria forced herself to focus. "I'll need access to all reports, environmental assessments, and financial records. If I'm going to turn it around, I'll need the truth, not what you've been feeding investors." For a fraction of a second, his eyes flickered with something she couldn't name. Then he nodded. "You'll have everything you need." Her gaze dropped briefly to the stack of folders on his desk. The weight of her manila envelope, hidden in her bag, pressed against her side. Inside were documents tied to Isabella's birth, evidence that the man across from her was not only her boss, but the father of a little girl he had never met. She pushed the thought away. She would not, reveal it now. The silence stretched until Alexander broke it. "I didn't expect to see you again, not after," his words trailed off. "After you took our work and claimed it as your own?" she finished, her voice sharp but calm. He flinched almost imperceptibly. The memory swept over her, long nights at Harvard Business School, drafting proposals side by side, the thrill of discovering solutions together. They had been unstoppable until the day she learned he had pitched their joint project alone, presenting it as his creation. Investors had backed him, leaving her sidelined and heartbroken. "You don't understand," he began. "I understand enough," she cut in. His jaw tightened. The man who once laughed with her over late-night coffee now sat cloaked in authority, but she could still see the trace of regret in his eyes. Victoria straightened her posture. "We don't need to revisit the past. My role here is professional, nothing more." Alexander studied her in silence, then leaned back in his chair. "Fine. but you should know that my personal life is not what it was then." The words landed heavier than she expected. "I'm married now," he continued. "Priscilla Vanderbilt. I assume you've heard of her." Of course she had. Priscilla's name was everywhere: gala invitations, magazine covers, charity boards. Victoria remembered the sting of discovering his engagement so soon after their breakup, her heartbreak compounded by the headlines of him smiling with New York's most eligible heiress. "Yes," Victoria said coolly. "I've heard." He watched her reaction carefully, as though expecting jealousy or outrage. She gave him neither. Inside, though, her heart clenched. She thought of Isabella at home in Tribeca, curls damp after bath time, green eyes shining as she asked for one more bedtime story. Their daughter had Alexander's chin, his determination already showing in the way she refused to be distracted from puzzles until every piece was in place. Victoria forced her thoughts back to the present. She could not let her emotions betray her. Her priority was her daughter's stability. Alexander's empire could crumble, his marriage could falter, but none of it could interfere with the life she had built for Isabella. Rising from her seat, she collected the project folders he had pushed toward her. "I'll review these and prepare a plan. You'll have my initial recommendations within the week." He stood as well, his height casting a shadow across the desk. "Very well. Welcome to Kane Industries, Ms. Sterling." Her lips curved into the faintest of smiles. "It's not about welcomes, Alexander. It's about results." As she turned to leave, she felt his gaze follow her, heavy with unspoken words. The door closed behind her, but the weight of their history lingered. Victoria walked down the hallway, her grip tightening on the folders. She had stepped back into his world for the sake of her career, but the secret she carried threatened to break them both wide open. Victoria unlocked the door to her Tribeca apartment, the noise of the city softening once she stepped inside. The space was warm, lined with bookshelves and filled with small signs of the life she cherished most. A stuffed giraffe on the sofa, crayons scattered across the coffee table, a blanket folded neatly at the foot of a toddler's bed down the hall. "Mommy!" Isabella's small voice rang out as she ran forward, curls bouncing. Victoria crouched, scooping her daughter into her arms, pressing her face into the familiar scent of baby lotion and lavender shampoo. At just 2 years old, Isabella already carried both of them in her features, her mother's green eyes, her father's chin and unshakable determination. The contrast was stark. Here, Victoria was not the executive navigating boardroom politics. She was simply a mother, reading bedtime stories and coaxing her daughter to eat vegetables. Yet every time Isabella asked why other children had daddies who picked them up from preschool, Victoria's heart tightened. 2 days later, she boarded a flight to Portland. The Oregon solar project was crumbling, angry residents, financial losses, and environmental concerns threatening to bury Kane Industries in scandal. Her task was to salvage it, but she also knew the assignment would force her to work more closely with Alexander than she had planned. The first community meeting tested her resolve. Dozens of locals filled the town hall, their voices rising with frustration. Farmers complained about water usage. Environmental activists demanded accountability for contaminated soil. City officials looked exhausted, caught between promises made and broken. Victoria stood at the front, notebook in hand. "I'm not here to make excuses," she told them. "I'm here to listen and to make changes. This project won't survive unless it works for you as much as it does for the company." The crowd quieted, skepticism softening into guarded attention. For 3 hours, she listened, wrote, and promised to act. Later that night, back in her hotel room overlooking the Columbia River, she opened her laptop for a scheduled call with New York. Alexander's face appeared on the screen. He looked as precise as ever, suit and tie in place despite the late hour. "The reports from Portland are better than expected," he said. "The Tribune even noted that the community responded well to you." "It's a start," Victoria replied, exhaustion tugging at her voice. "But there's years of mistrust to work through. This won't be fixed overnight." Their calls became a pattern. Him in his sleek Manhattan office, her in modest hotel rooms, both speaking longer than necessary. At first the conversation stuck to business, but slowly, pieces of their old rhythm crept in. He asked about her flights, whether she was eating well. She teased him about his habit of triple-checking numbers. The distance between them narrowed, even through a glowing screen. Still, she guarded herself. Every time Alexander's tone softened, she thought of Isabella asleep in her bed back home, a secret waiting for the wrong moment to explode. Weeks passed. The Oregon project began to stabilize as she brought in local contractors and implemented new environmental safeguards. Positive press followed, crediting Kane Industries with a turnaround many had called impossible. Alexander congratulated her, but his gaze lingered too long during video calls, as though searching for something she wasn't saying. One night, he asked outright, "You're different, Victoria. Driven as always, but guarded. What are you hiding?" Her pulse quickened. She forced a steady tone. "I'm protecting my work. Nothing more." He didn't look convinced, but he let the subject drop. The turning point came during a storm that swept across the Pacific Northwest. Winds lashed against the construction site as Victoria inspected safety measures. Her phone buzzed. She answered quickly, shielding it from the rain. It was her nanny, voice strained with panic. "Ms. Sterling, Isabella's burning up. She's asking for you. I think we need to take her to the hospital." Victoria's knees weakened. "I'll be on the next flight back," she said, fighting to steady her voice. "Take her to Mount Sinai. Ask for Dr. Rodriguez. He knows her history." Lightning split the sky. She ended the call, trembling, already pulling up flight schedules with shaking fingers. She barely noticed the footsteps behind her until Alexander's voice cut through the roar of the storm. "Victoria, what's wrong?" Rain lashed against the half-assembled solar panels as Victoria tried to steady her breathing. Her phone slipped slightly in her damp hand. Isabella's fever, the hospital, her little girl asking for her. The words replayed like a warning siren in her head. Alexander stepped closer, his voice cutting through the storm. "Tell me what happened." "My daughter is sick," she answered without thinking. The admission slipped out too quickly, but she pushed past it. "I need to get back to New York now." He didn't hesitate. "Take my jet. It's already at Portland International. I'll have the crew ready within the hour." "Alex, I can't." "Yes, you can. This isn't about business. Go." His tone left no room for refusal. Hours later, she sat rigidly in the leather seat of his jet as it sped through turbulent skies. Each vibration rattled her nerves. She stared at the darkened window, fists clenched in her lap. By the time she reached Mount Sinai, Isabella's fever had broken, but the relief only sharpened her guilt. Her daughter's small voice echoed in her mind. "Mommy, where's my daddy?" In the sterile hospital room, Victoria sat by the bed, brushing damp curls from Isabella's forehead. The child shifted in her sleep, whispering softly. Victoria pressed her lips to her daughter's hand, tears slipping free. She didn't notice Alexander at first. He entered quietly, his usual composure replaced by concern. "Is she stable?" Victoria straightened, wiping her face quickly. "Yes. The doctors say she's past the worst of it." He stepped closer, studying the little girl's features. "She looks like you," he said softly. Then, after a beat, "But she has my chin." Her breath caught. The words she had buried for 2 years pressed to the surface. She could no longer hold them in. "Her name is Isabella," Victoria said. "She's 2 years old. And she's yours." The room stilled. For the first time since she had known him, Alexander Kane looked unmoored. His eyes widened, his lips parted as though struggling for air. "Mine." "Yes." The word left her in a rush. "I found out after we ended. You were already engaged. I made the decision to raise her alone." He sank into the nearest chair, hands gripping the armrests. "You kept my child from me?" Her defenses cracked. "What was I supposed to do, Alex? You paraded your engagement across every magazine cover while I was deciding how to bring a child into the world. Do you know what it felt like to see you smiling with Priscilla while her voice broke. "While I carried your daughter?" He ran a hand through his hair, anger and disbelief fighting for dominance. You should have told me. Engagement or not, I had a right to know. You had a right? Victoria's voice sharpened. Where was my right when you stole our work and left me humiliated in front of investors? Where was my right when you chose ambition over honesty? I wasn't going to let you do that to her. The weight of her words pressed between them. Alexander turned toward Isabella's bed, his expression softening as he watched the child stir. For a moment, his voice dropped. She's mine, and I missed everything. Her first steps, her first words. Victoria's tears returned. I wanted to tell you so many times, but every headline reminded me that your life didn't have room for us. His gaze returned to her, steel cutting through sorrow. That was not your choice to make. The confrontation burned between them, raw and unfiltered. Yet beneath the fury was something else, an ache neither could ignore. Alexander's voice cracked when he spoke again. I want to know her. I don't care how complicated my life is. She's my daughter, Victoria. Victoria folded her arms tightly across her chest, holding herself together. It won't be simple. You can't just walk in and claim her because you suddenly feel guilty. She's happy, secure, and I won't let that be destroyed. His jaw set. I'm not asking for permission to feel guilty. I'm telling you I won't disappear again. The silence stretched, broken only by the steady beep of hospital monitors. Victoria exhaled slowly, her heart torn between fear and relief. The truth was finally out, but the consequences were only beginning. Alexander didn't leave the hospital that night. He stayed in the waiting room, jacket folded beside him, his phone buzzing unanswered in his pocket. By morning, dark circles framed his eyes, but his resolve was sharper than ever. When Victoria stepped out of Isabella's room, he stood immediately. I need to see her, he said. Not later. Now. She hesitated, torn between instinct and compassion. She's barely recovering. This isn't the time. It's the only time, Alexander replied. His voice was steady, but the plea beneath it was unmistakable. She's my daughter, and I won't spend another day as a stranger. Victoria studied him carefully. The man before her was not the untouchable executive she remembered from glossy magazine covers. He looked stripped of control, raw, vulnerable. Finally, she nodded. 5 minutes. If she's uncomfortable, we stop. Inside the room, Isabella sat up in bed, clutching her stuffed giraffe. Her eyes widened at the tall man stepping in beside her mother. Alexander crouched down to her level, his expensive suit creasing against the hospital floor. He cleared his throat. Hi, Isabella. His voice was softer than Victoria had ever heard it. The little girl blinked, then tilted her head. Are you my daddy? The words struck him harder than any boardroom battle. He glanced at Victoria, whose grip on the bed rail tightened. She gave the faintest nod. Yes, Alexander said, his voice breaking just slightly. I'm your daddy. Isabella studied him, as though weighing the truth. After a pause, she extended her giraffe. You can hold him. Alexander accepted the worn toy as if it were the most precious object in the world. His hands, usually so certain over contracts and signatures, trembled as he cradled it. Thank you. He's perfect. Victoria's throat ached as she watched. Every instinct screamed to shield her daughter, yet guilt gnawed at her. This was the moment she had denied them both. Alexander tried again. Do you like stories? I used to tell your mom stories when we were in school. Isabella's eyes lit up. About princesses? About anything you want, he said quickly, his awkwardness dissolving into sincerity. But I'll need you to help me. I'm a little out of practice. For the next 10 minutes, he stumbled through a tale about a brave giraffe and a girl who taught him how to be strong. Isabella giggled, correcting him when he forgot details or mixed up characters. For Victoria, the sight was both heartwarming and excruciating. When Isabella drifted back to sleep, Alexander placed the giraffe beside her carefully. He stood, facing Victoria across the bed. She deserves to know me, he said quietly. Not in bits and pieces. Not through stories about someone absent. I want to be here. Fully. Victoria folded her arms, her voice clipped. You can't just walk into her life and expect her to understand overnight. She needs stability. You've built your world on constant change and ambition. That's not what she needs. I can learn, he countered. I've built empires from scratch. Don't tell me I can't learn to be a father. Her chest tightened. She isn't a business, Alex. You don't win her with strategy. You show up. Every day. No excuses. I will. His answer came without hesitation. Victoria searched his face, waiting for arrogance, but what she saw instead was conviction laced with regret. It rattled her more than his anger ever could. Over the next few days, as Isabella recovered, Alexander returned to the hospital each morning. He brought coloring books, juice boxes, even a puppet show performed with clumsy enthusiasm. His efforts were far from polished, but they were genuine. Isabella began asking for him, her small voice calling, "Where's Daddy?" when he wasn't there. Each request tore at Victoria's defenses. She couldn't ignore her daughter's joy, yet the fear of being hurt again weighed heavily. She watched from the sidelines, her emotions caught between suspicion and reluctant hope. On Isabella's final day in the hospital, Alexander walked Victoria to the lobby. "This isn't temporary," he said firmly. "I want to be part of her world. If you're willing, we'll figure out how." Victoria inhaled sharply. The words she wanted to say tangled in her throat. She wasn't ready to trust him, but she couldn't deny that her daughter deserved the chance. "We'll try," she whispered at last. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was a beginning. Priscilla Vanderbilt Kane was the kind of woman who never lost her composure. At charity galas, she was a vision of elegance, her diamond necklaces reflecting camera flashes, her laughter rehearsed yet convincing. But when she opened the door to their Fifth Avenue penthouse, one evening to find Alexander walking in late again, his tie loosened and his phone still in his hand, something inside her shifted. "You've missed 3 dinners this week," she said. "At first, I thought it was work. But now," her voice faltered before hardening. "It isn't work, is it?" Alexander set his briefcase down, his shoulders heavy. "There's something I need to tell you." Priscilla folded her arms, bracing herself. "I have a daughter. She's 2 years old. Her name is Isabella." The silence that followed stretched long and brittle. Priscilla's eyes searched his face, waiting for a trace of sarcasm or a cruel joke. But Alexander's gaze was steady. "You're serious?" "Yes." Her breath hitched, but she didn't shout. She didn't break the crystal glass in her hand. Instead, she lowered it gently to the counter. "With Victoria Sterling." He nodded once. Priscilla closed her eyes. "Of course. The one woman who never really left your mind." Alexander stepped forward. "I never intended for this to happen, but I can't turn away from my child. She needs me." "And what about me, Alex?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What do I need? Because I didn't marry into a half-formed family built on secrets. I married you." The conversation ended quietly, not with fireworks, but with a door gently closing between them. Within weeks, papers were filed. While the divorce played out, Isabella unknowingly forced harder conversations at home. One night, as Victoria tucked her in, Isabella asked softly, "Why don't I have a family like Emma at school? She has a mommy and a daddy in the same house." Victoria's chest tightened. She smoothed Isabella's blanket, struggling for the right words. "Families come in all kinds, sweetheart. You have me, and now you have your daddy too. But he doesn't live here." Isabella's eyes shone with confusion more than sadness. "Doesn't that mean he doesn't want me?" Victoria's throat closed. She pulled her daughter close, whispering, "No, baby. He wants you very much. Sometimes adults need time to fix things before they can be together the way you see with other kids. But he loves you. I promise." Later that week, Victoria found Alexander waiting outside Isabella's preschool. He carried a small paper crown their daughter had made during arts and crafts. She watched from a distance as Isabella placed it on his head and declared him King Daddy. Alexander didn't care that parents around them chuckled. He wore the crown as if it were priceless. That image stayed with Victoria. Each time she tried to remind herself of his betrayals, She thought of Isabella's laughter as Alexander carried her on his shoulders through Central Park, or the way he listened intently to her rambling stories about finger paints and playground adventures. Gradually, resistance gave way to something softer. She still guarded herself, but she couldn't deny that Alexander was showing up in ways she never expected. Meanwhile, Priscilla surprised them both. At the final divorce meeting, she signed the papers with steady hands, then looked at Alexander across the table. "I won't fight you on this," she said. "It's clear where your heart belongs. I only wish you'd been honest sooner." She slid the pen forward, her eyes carrying no malice, only exhaustion. "Don't waste the second chance you've been given." Alexander's voice was low. "I'm sorry for everything." Priscilla stood, her pearls catching the light as she adjusted them one last time. "I know. Now go be the man you should have been all along." The marriage ended not with scandal, but with quiet release. For Alexander, the shift was profound. He began canceling meetings that once seemed non-negotiable. Instead of late-night drinks with investors, he spent evenings building Lego castles with Isabella. His assistant noticed the change first. His calendar suddenly included blocks of time labeled only family. But it wasn't just his personal life. Kane Industries itself began to transform. Alexander sat at the head of the boardroom table, sleeves rolled up, speaking with an intensity that surprised his executives. "We've built this company on profit margins and quarterly returns. That ends now. From this point forward, sustainability isn't a department, it's our foundation. Renewable energy, ethical labor, community partnerships. If we can't build a future that my daughter can be proud of, then what's the point?" Some board members resisted, muttering about cost. Alexander silenced them with a look. "The cost of doing nothing is greater. Victoria showed us that in Oregon. She listened when I refused to. Now we'll do more than listen. We'll lead." Victoria, seated across from him, felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest. It wasn't trust yet, not fully. But it was hope. By the time Isabella celebrated her 3rd birthday, Alexander had moved out of his penthouse and into a townhouse closer to Tribeca. The guest room transformed into a nursery painted soft yellow, with shelves stacked high with storybooks. When Isabella blew out her candles, she looked between her parents, eyes bright. "Now it feels like a family." For Alexander and Victoria, it wasn't a perfect beginning, but it was a beginning nonetheless. Trust wasn't something Victoria gave easily, not after years of carrying the weight of secrecy alone. Yet over the months following Isabella's 3rd birthday, Alexander began to show her something she had never expected: consistency. He didn't miss pickups at preschool. If traffic delayed him, he called ahead so Isabella wouldn't stand at the window waiting in vain. He learned which bedtime stories made her giggle. Goodnight Moon was a favorite, but she loved when he made up stories about King Daddy and Princess Bella even more. He even learned how to braid her hair, fumbling at first until Isabella declared with a grin, "It's crooked, but it's mine." On weekends, Alexander took her to Central Park. The carousel became their ritual. Each time, Isabella demanded the painted horse with the golden mane, and each time Alexander ran beside her as the music played, clapping until she laughed so hard she nearly toppled from the saddle. Victoria watched from a distance during those moments, her heart tight with conflict. The man who once shattered her trust was now kneeling in the grass, tying their daughter's shoelaces, patient and unhurried. Every time she tried to remind herself of the betrayal, another image replaced it. Isabella curled in Alexander's lap, fast asleep as he hummed softly, his hand resting protectively on her back. The change didn't stop at home. Professionally, Alexander began deferring to Victoria in ways she had never thought possible. At Kane Industries, the Oregon Solar Project became their joint proving ground. By spring, the project that had once teetered on collapse was thriving. Fields of panels glinted under clear skies. Local contractors praised the company's fair wages, and farmers who once stood in opposition now attended meetings as partners. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Alexander surprised everyone by stepping back from the podium. "This project belongs to someone who had the courage to listen when I didn't," he told the gathered crowd. He gestured toward Victoria. Victoria Sterling showed us what leadership looks like, not in numbers on a balance sheet, but in the lives we touch. She deserves this moment. Applause rippled through the crowd as Victoria took the microphone. She caught Alexander's gaze briefly, and for the first time in years, the familiar spark of their shared ambition returned. They had once thrived on pushing each other, and here they were again, older, wiser, but with the same undeniable rhythm. Late nights at the office echoed with that rhythm. They debated design specifications, negotiated supplier contracts, even sketched ideas on whiteboards until their laughter spilled over old walls of resentment. It wasn't flirtation, at least not yet, but it was trust in the making, rebuilt not with words but with hours spent side by side. Still, Victoria tested him. She watched for cracks in his resolve, waiting for excuses, distractions, or the call of his former lifestyle. But Alexander didn't falter. He skipped investor dinners to attend Isabella's preschool play, cheering loudly as she played a flower in a cardboard meadow. When she tugged him backstage after the show, introducing him as "my daddy" to her classmates, Alexander's smile was unguarded, almost boyish. One evening, Victoria arrived at his townhouse to pick up Isabella and found them sprawled on the living room floor, building towers of wooden blocks. Alexander looked up, hair tousled, tie abandoned on the coffee table. "We're making the tallest castle in New York," Isabella announced proudly. Victoria knelt beside them, placing a block carefully on top. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to feel the pull of something she hadn't in years, belonging. Later, as she tucked Isabella into bed back at her apartment, her daughter whispered, "I like when Daddy's around. You laugh more when he's here." The words stayed with Victoria long after Isabella fell asleep. She thought of Alexander's earnest attempts at fatherhood, his willingness to listen, his quiet moments of humility. The man she had once sworn never to forgive was slowly becoming someone she could trust again. Not through declarations, but through presence. Back at Kane Industries, the board began to take notice of Alexander's transformation. Gone was the executive obsessed with expansion at any cost. In his place stood a man who spoke of sustainability, responsibility, and legacy. "We're no longer chasing the next quarter," he told them in a meeting. "We're building a future measured not just by profit, but by the world we leave behind. My daughter deserves better. So does every child." Some directors exchanged skeptical glances, but none dared challenge him. The momentum of the Oregon project had silenced many doubts. More importantly, the sincerity in his words was undeniable. Victoria sat beside him, listening. For the first time in years, she felt the echo of the man she had fallen in love with at Harvard. The one who dreamed of changing the world, not just conquering it. The years had altered them, scarred them, but at their core, they still shared the same values. One night, after finalizing the Oregon project's expansion, Alexander walked her to her car. "I know I can't erase the past," he said, "but I hope I'm showing you who I want to be, for Isabella, and for you." Victoria searched his face, tempted to answer, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she nodded. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was acknowledgement. As spring turned to summer, the pieces of trust slowly began to fit together again. Not perfectly, but enough to form a foundation. For the first time, Victoria allowed herself to wonder if the man who had once broken her heart could truly become the partner she had always wanted him to be. The autumn air in Central Park carried a cool crispness, golden leaves drifting onto the pathways around Bethesda Terrace. Families strolled past, children laughing near the fountain where water glistened in the afternoon sun. Victoria had no idea why Alexander had insisted on meeting here, with Isabella skipping happily between them, clutching both their hands. When they reached the fountain, Isabella broke free, chasing pigeons with gleeful shrieks. Alexander turned to Victoria, his eyes uncharacteristically nervous. He cleared his throat. "I've stood in boardrooms, on stages, in places where I've faced thousands," he said, his voice low. "But I've never felt more unsteady than I do right now." Victoria tilted her head, her pulse quickening. Before she could respond, Alexander reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He sank to one knee on the stone steps, the sight stopping Victoria's breath. "Victoria Sterling," he said, his voice steadying, "you gave me the greatest gift of my life without ever asking for anything in return. You gave me our daughter, and now, after everything, you've given me a chance to prove myself. I don't want another day to pass without calling you my partner in every way. Will you marry me?" Isabella, still chasing pigeons, suddenly stopped and ran over, tugging Victoria's dress. "Say yes, Mommy. Please." Her little face glowed with anticipation. Tears welled in Victoria's eyes. She had promised herself she would never again give Alexander that kind of power over her heart. Yet here he was, no longer the man who had once chosen ambition over love, but someone humbled by fatherhood and remade by responsibility. She knelt down beside him, her hand trembling as she whispered, "Yes." Isabella squealed, clapping her hands, while passers-by cheered. Alexander slid the ring onto Victoria's finger, then pulled both mother and daughter into his arms, the three of them held together by something stronger than pride or fear. A family finally whole. Their wedding took place on Martha's vineyard the following summer. It wasn't the kind of spectacle the Cain name usually commanded. Instead, they chose intimacy over grandeur. A white tent overlooked the ocean, simple wildflowers lined the aisle, and only their closest friends and family attended. Isabella, in a crown of daisies, took her role as flower girl with immense seriousness. She scattered petals with solemn precision, only breaking character to wave excitedly at Alexander waiting at the altar. When Victoria appeared, wearing a silk gown that flowed like water, Alexander's eyes filled with tears he didn't bother to hide. The vows were spoken quietly, almost as though meant for no one else but the two of them. "You were my fiercest rival, my greatest heartbreak, and now my truest partner," Victoria said softly, her hand resting on his. "I don't forgive the past because it made me who I am. But I love the man you've become, and I choose our future." When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Isabella ran forward, demanding her share of the kiss. They laughed as Alexander bent down, kissing Victoria first, then their daughter on the forehead. The guests erupted in joy, but for the three of them, it felt like the world had grown suddenly quiet, centered only on their small circle of love. In the years that followed, Cain Industries transformed as dramatically as Alexander himself. No longer a company chasing aggressive acquisitions, it became a leader in renewable energy. Solar farms bloomed across Oregon and Arizona. Offshore wind projects expanded along the Atlantic coast, and a foundation dedicated to climate education bore Isabella's name. Executives who once scoffed at sustainability now spoke with conviction about legacy and responsibility. Shareholders who doubted Alexander's pivot found themselves rewarded by steady, principled growth. More importantly, communities that had once feared corporate encroachment now welcomed partnerships that valued their voices. Through it all, Victoria stood not in Alexander's shadow, but beside him. She led initiatives, shaped policies, and challenged him as she always had. Their marriage was no fairy tale, but it was strong, built on respect, shared purpose, and the grounding presence of their daughter. Their home was not a sprawling mansion, but a modest beach cottage in the Hamptons. Weathered wood framed the porch, and the sea breeze carried the scent of salt and dune grass. On weekends, they grilled on the deck, Isabella chasing sand crabs at the shore while Alexander and Victoria clinked glasses under the setting sun. It wasn't luxury that defined their happiness, but simplicity. Board games scattered across the coffee table, drawings taped to the fridge, the sound of Isabella's laughter echoing down the hall. One evening, after a long day of kite flying, Isabella snuggled between her parents on the porch swing. The horizon blazed with streaks of orange and pink as the ocean whispered against the sand. "Mommy, Daddy," she said suddenly, her voice drowsy but clear. "Are we a happy family now?" Alexander glanced at Victoria, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "Yes, Bella," Victoria answered softly, kissing her daughter's curls. "We're a happy family." Isabella yawned, her eyelids fluttering shut. "Good," she murmured. Because happy families make the world better. Her words lingered in the quiet evening, more profound than she could know. For Alexander and Victoria, who had once lost everything to pride and pain, the truth was simple. Their daughter had given them not just a second chance at love, but a reason to build a life that mattered. Isabella stood on the low deck railing of their Hamptons cottage, her small hands gripping the wood as she surveyed the ocean stretching endlessly before her. At 5, the world felt vast, filled with mysteries she wanted to explore, yet grounded in the love surrounding her. Between her parents, she felt complete, not missing pieces, not empty spaces. "Look at that wave," she shouted, pointing to the cresting curl of water before it broke against the sand. Alexander lifted her gently, letting her balance on his shoulders. Victoria leaned close, brushing a strand of hair from Isabella's forehead. The three of them laughed, voices mingling with the rhythm of the waves. From this vantage point, Isabella didn't need to understand the complexities of adult life. She knew only that her family was together, that her parents argued less than they smiled, and that the home they had built wasn't just walls and furniture, but a space where love and attention thrived. Alexander watched Victoria's profile, remembering the first time he had truly seen her after years of absence. The green eyes that had once challenged him, the determination that had frightened him, the compassion that had softened him. She had endured betrayals, navigated parenthood alone, and still emerged unshaken. He felt both awe and gratitude. Victoria, in turn, reflected on the journey that had brought them here. Harvard ambitions, corporate rivalries, heartbreak, and secrets all had led to this unexpected balance. She traced her fingers over Isabella's hair, realizing that the child had given them not just a second chance, but a clearer vision of who they wanted to be. The Oregon Solar Project, once a disaster teetering on collapse, had become a national benchmark for sustainable development. Communities once wary of cane industries now welcomed partnerships that respected their land and culture. Farms flourished alongside solar arrays. Towns received renewable energy education programs, and public trust in the company had soared. Alexander and Victoria's shared commitment to integrity and accountability reshaped not only their business, but the lives of countless families across America. In the evenings, after Isabella's bedtime, Alexander and Victoria often sat on the porch, sipping tea while the sun sank below the horizon. The conversation wandered through memories of missteps, lessons learned, and the unexpected joy of watching their daughter grow. "I never thought we could get here," Alexander admitted quietly one evening, the amber sky reflecting in his eyes. "I was so focused on what I thought success meant that I lost sight of what mattered." Victoria smiled, her hand finding his. "We were both blind in our own ways. But I've learned something. Mistakes don't have to define you if you're willing to change." Their hands lingered together, a symbol of the partnership that had survived betrayal, distance, and fear. Each decision they made now, both personal and professional, carried the weight of shared experience and the commitment to honor what they had rebuilt. Isabella, emerging sleepily from her room, interrupted the moment. "Mommy, Daddy," she murmured, "do you think happy families really do make the world better?" Alexander exchanged a glance with Victoria, the words resonating more deeply than they could have imagined. He knelt beside her, holding her small hands in his. "Yes, sweetheart. Every time we care for each other, every time we make choices that protect and support those we love, we make the world better." Victoria added, her voice soft but firm. "And sometimes that starts with the family you build yourself." Isabella smiled, settling between them on the swing. The three of them swung gently, the sound of their laughter mingling with the ocean breeze. In her mind, the lessons were simple and true. Honesty, commitment, and love could turn even difficult beginnings into lasting joy. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in warm golds and deep pinks, Alexander and Victoria reflected on how far they had come. Enemies in ambition, allies in survival, partners in parenthood, and now lovers in every sense, they had forged a life not dictated by ego or wealth, but by shared purpose, integrity, and the joy of watching their child thrive. The sunset marked the end of a day, yet it also symbolized the legacy they were leaving. Not in skyscrapers or bank accounts, but in a home filled with warmth, a company guided by ethics, and a daughter who would grow up knowing love's power. Even in quiet moments, the lessons of their journey lingered. Second chances were possible. Redemption could be earned through consistent actions, and authentic success required more than recognition or profit. It required courage, humility, and the willingness to prioritize what truly matters. As darkness settled over the beach, Isabella's small voice broke the silence once more. "I love you both." Alexander held her close, whispering, "We love you too, Bella." More than anything. Victoria, leaning into Alexander's shoulder, added, "And we'll keep learning together every day." The waves rolled in rhythm with their breaths, a gentle soundtrack to a life rebuilt. The cottage, the ocean, the laughter of their daughter, everything combined into a moment that was simple, profound, and eternal. The story of Alexander and Victoria, once torn apart by ambition and secrets, now stood as proof that love could conquer past grievances, rebuild trust, and leave a legacy that extended beyond wealth. Their family had not only survived, they had flourished. For viewers following their journey, the message was clear. Mistakes do not preclude growth. Heartbreak does not prevent new beginnings, and courage paired with love can transform lives in ways no one can predict. Stay tuned for tomorrow's story, and share where you're watching from. Every subscription helps bring more powerful stories of resilience, love, and redemption.